Alright, so in this video I'm back working on the Raptor, installing a new air compressor and fundamentally changing my dual battery wiring. During the 37 video I noted that the Viair 400P that I installed into the deck system was too slow filling up one tire, and it would overheat after only that one tire. I've been watching all this cool YouTube content on these dual piston compressors, and I thought that getting one of these was the best option because they're cheap and they seem like they'd be super fun to upgrade. The first thing I did was test the compressor on one of the tires. This is nearly impossible to compare time-wise since the air chuck that comes with it is screw-on and it doesn't have a pressure switch, but I was able to verify that at least it did work. I did the same basic upgrades that everyone does on these, including drilling and tapping the manifold hole to 1/4 inch NPT, adding a splitter and pressure switch, and a high-flow closed chuck. This all actually took me several hours, and I was surprised how difficult it was compared to, just watching it on YouTube. The manufacturer used red Loctite on the head connections, making it difficult to remove the manifold, and it is harder than I thought to drill and tap aluminum since it's soft and it just likes to stick to everything. Additionally, I bought a weird mix of connectors to avoid dissimilar metals, and since I originally wanted a check valve after the manifold but before the pressure switch, that didn't end up working out. In the end, I had a mix of stainless and aluminum and brass to stainless, which would all be fine, except the NPT threading on the stainless was a little bit odd. I did have to pause for a little while after these initial upgrades because I was waiting on some parts. My dual battery setup originally had 2-gauge wire running from the starter battery directly to the DC to DC charger in the bed. I figured that the 2-gauge would allow me to safely run the 20 amp DC to DC charger and the 40 amp air compressor at the same time. I ended up wiring the compressor to the house battery anyway, but regardless, I knew that I wanted to run the new 90 amp compressor directly off the start battery and have enough current available to run a rear winch in the future. For that, I would need to run 4/0 wiring to the rear with new heavier bus bars and a battery cutoff for safety. While I was waiting, I began removing the old connections and wiring, which I would be reusing as the wiring for the compressor. I also pulled out the deck system and removed the old compressor from the bed. So then I cut and bent, and then test fit, and then recut a steel bracket to mount the new cutoff and fuse into the vehicle. I bench wired that whole assembly and then did the final install in the engine bay before realizing that the bracket was no good because everything would be impacting on the hood. I'm not sure why it worked out before during the testing and then it didn't work out now, but that's just how it was. I decided to add terminals to the engine bay side of the 4/0 wire, having the negative side longer in order to reach the battery directly, and then install both wires into a wire sleeve. This was insanely exhausting since the 4/0 wire is super heavy, but after I got it into the sleeve, I installed the new wire where the old wiring was along the frame and into the truck bed. When the new bracket paint was dry, I transferred everything over and installed it in the engine bay, connecting the 4/0 wire terminals, the ground, and the fuse tap accessory cable, which I rerouted from the DC to DC charger to the cutoff, but waiting to install the shorter runs directly to the battery. Back in the truck bed, I tried cutting the wire to length, but my shears were only good for 2-gauge, and when I went to install the terminals, the frayed wire wouldn't fit. So I made a huge mess trying to cut it again and strip the wire to install the terminals. Eventually, I finished the wiring and moved on to finalizing the DC to DC charger wiring and fuse. Now that I had all of the stuff to finish the compressor wiring, I added terminals to all of the connections, including the pressure switch, and installed the relay connecting everything on the negative side. And then I ran the power cables using a screw type wire connection between the 2-gauge power cable and the 8-gauge cable running directly to the compressor motor. I did keep the physical switch connected between the power and the pressure switch. After everything had heat shrink on it, I realized that I forgot to add the fuse, and I had to run and buy more terminals, and then I finally got the fuse hooked up and tested the compressor, running it directly to the house battery. The compressor ran, but I had massive air leaks. I didn't record it all, but I had leaks from a pinched O-ring, I had leaks from the heads, I had leaks from nearly every connection. This was not a fun time, and that's why I hate this design of air compressor. It might have been an easy fix if I had used tape, but I went high temp dope only on all of the connections to avoid burnt tape under all that heat. I got it sorted though, and I mounted the compressor in the bed using rivet nuts, and then I threw the deck system into the bed to figure out my cut locations. A week before I cut this, the Decked came out with their new system that has the ammo boxes deleted, so I wasn't too worried about cutting around the exterior since I knew that all the support comes from the inside. So I marked the spots and I got to cutting. I did a quick test fit before finalizing all of the wiring and reinstalling the deck system. Once it was all hooked up, I did the final battery connections and tested the system. The battery charger was working great, the compressor wiring was all tucked away, the interior lighting was working, and the compressor pressure switch was also operating properly. I waited a long time to finally test the system and compare the two compressors. This is not an exact science since I didn't have some auto pressure sensing shutoff, but I tried to compare the two compressors back to back with the same air chuck, only counting the time when I was pressing the fill lever. It took the new compressor 72 seconds to fill the 37-inch KO2 from 20 psi to 39 psi. And it took the old compressor 175 seconds to fill the tire from 20 to 39 psi. So, final thoughts on this is that modifying these cheap compressors is not fun, not easy, and I'm not entirely sure that it's reliable. I will say that having a compressor on the truck is a must for me, and I've found that I use it all the time for fun things. But that's in the next video. Additionally, wiring a second battery can be daunting and dangerous. I went through a lot to make sure that I was comfortable with what I was doing, and I honestly don't really recommend this for anyone to do it themselves. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.